To me, there are five main supplements that I kind of call my foundational five that almost everybody would benefit from taking. Now, I say almost everybody. So understand, real quick disclaimer, I'm not giving you medical advice. I don't know your specific situation. So take notes on what I'm going to say and know that these are generally good for everybody, but there may be some special circumstances for you. So discuss that with your functional medicine doctor or your clinician practitioner who's knowledgeable about nutrition and supplementation. Your regular family practice doctor might not know much of anything about supplementation, and they're not always the best resource for whether or not you should or can be taking something. Find someone knowledgeable about supplementation. So, that being said, the foundational five for me, it's going to consist of number one, a multivitamin of some sort, fish oil, probiotics, vitamin D, and magnesium. Those are supplements that almost everybody needs. And I'm going to go into some information on why. I'm going to do a series of videos on this. So this one's going to cover multivitamin. So as far as multivitamins go, you have a couple of options in what I would call classes of multivitamins. We have everything from your grocery store one a day multi. Then we have what I would consider a modern traditional multivitamin, which is going to be higher dose, higher concentration, partly, if not all, synthetic, not really derived from food or containing whole food, all the way to your whole food multivitamin, which is not going to have the amounts that you're used to seeing of individual vitamins and minerals listed on the label, but it's going to be foods that are nutrient dense that you're probably not eating much of on your own. So those are kind of the three classes, and they do overlap a fair amount. So I don't know that you can draw hard, distinct lines between those, but in general, you get what I'm saying. Quickly, let me say something about the one a days. I'm not generally a big fan of a one a day multivitamin, and it's not so much that it's only one dose. That's You can't fit a whole day's nutrition into one single dose. Now, granted, these are supplements. They are not supposed to be providing all of your nutrients. They are supposed to supplement your diet. So first, let me say I'm taking the macronutrients out of this discussion. The carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that's out of this discussion. When I talk about nutrients, I'm talking about more of the micronutrients compared to carbs, protein, and fat. Um, so your minerals, your vitamins, your antioxidants, those kinds of things. So understand that if you were to take all of your necessary supplemental nutrients in one single dose for the day, you're likely going to waste a fair amount of that. The analogy I use with patients regularly is, let's say you go to the gas station at the beginning of the month, and I tell you you've got one time to pump all your gas for the month. Like, I've got a 36-gallon gas tank in my truck. I probably fill it twice a month. All right, so 70-ish gallons of gas. So let's say I go at the beginning of the month and I pump all 70 gallons. Well, the first 30 something are going to fill the tank, and then the next 35 are just going to spill all over the ground. And then I'm going to leave and drive around. And my tank's full. But a couple weeks into the month, I'm going to run out of fuel, and I'm going to wish I had the 30 something gallons that overflowed onto the ground. It's just not an efficient way to get it done. If someone told me you can pump less than it takes to fill your tank, but you can do it four times a month, I'm not going to run out of gas. Like, I'll be able to go all month, no problem. I'm not wasting any on the ground, right? So understand conceptually that trying to get everything in one pill one time a day is like pumping all of your monthly gas in one visit to the gas tank or to the gas station. It's not efficient. You're going to overflow, and then you're going to be lacking later on. So the one a day concept just doesn't hold water. Now, if you're taking a moderate dose of nutrients and you have a really good quality diet, which is debatable, we'll get to that, you could make the argument that taking a third of a daily dose of supplements would give you a little bit of extra nutrition without taking the full amount. And that would be a one capsule a day kind of thing. And that's fine. I get that. But you're not trying to cram an entire day's worth of supplementation into one capsule. That's where you run into trouble. So the traditional one a day multivitamins, I think they're largely a waste of money. They use very inexpensive ingredients. Many of those ingredients are difficult for you to absorb and assimilate into your body. Um, Minerals, for example, the way we're generally supposed to get minerals is the water hits the ground, it filters through the rocks. As it does that, it picks up certain minerals from the rocks and dissolves some of that into the topsoil. Plants bring that up from the topsoil and they kind of build that into a biologic matrix, like a living matrix, kind of like we would have. And then either we eat the plants or something eats the plants and turns that into muscle and bone and cartilage, and then we eat that animal. One way or the other, it's supposed to go through a couple steps like that. So if you put calcium carbonate, for example, which is basically limestone or chalk, if you put that into a nutritional supplement and I take that, I'm basically swallowing rocks. I mean, it's dust, but essentially it's the same thing. And I may absorb some of it, but I'm not going to make good use of it. If you derived that calcium from a plant and it's already bound to an acid or a protein, or you get it in a collagen form where it's extracted from bone or cartilage, that's going to be easier for me to absorb and use because it's already built into a form that my body recognizes. Okay. So when I talk about sometimes they use cheap ingredients, they skip all of those steps that build it into a biologic matrix that I can use. And they go back to giving me limestone. Yes, it's calcium, but it's just not that effective, right? And then they give me a whole day's worth in one pill. So anyway, you get my point. Now, back to multivitamins that I recommend, because that's why you're watching this. Three classes. I'm going to skip the one a day grocery store class. That's not what we do. So I'm going to start with what I consider the modern traditional multivitamin. In my office, it's almost a hybrid between modern traditional and whole food. So I use one called Primal Multi. I always feel silly holding these up. I feel like it's an old cheesy commercial from the 1950s. That's from a company called Designs for Health. It is a fairly traditional multivitamin. I'm not going to show you the back because you couldn't read it anyway, but you can look it up on my website. It's going to have a lot of the nutritional ingredients you expect to see, the B vitamins, the minerals, some antioxidants, things like that. So you'll see that stuff in there like you normally see it, but they did include some things like broccoli seed powder and broccoli seed extract, um, citrus bioflavonoids. They did include some food material to kind of round out the, I want to call them chemical, but kind of the synthetic vitamins that are in there. They've made an attempt to provide some whole food material in there to round those out and make them more usable, provide a little bit of synergy with those nutrients. And then they include some antioxidants that aren't normally seen. Well, I guess I shouldn't just say antioxidants, some nutritional compounds that aren't always seen in a regular over the counter multivitamin. So I consider this one kind of a hybrid. Now, let's talk dosage for a minute because three a day, three capsules a day is a standard dose on this supplement. That's for about a 150-pound person. So if you weigh 200 pounds, maybe four capsules a day would be your dose. If you're just barely over 100 pounds, maybe two capsules a day would be your dose. It's variable. If you come in here in a significantly deficient state, let's say you've just finished chemotherapy, or something like that, or you've had a really bad stomach bug, or I had a patient a few weeks back who had the majority of her intestines removed because of autoimmune disease. And so she has a lot of trouble absorbing nutrients. So she's been largely devoid of nutrition for quite some time. So in those cases, we may actually bump the dose up a little bit, but spreading it out throughout the day. So the dosage becomes kind of variable, but you get the point. That's an example of what I would call a modern traditional multivitamin. Okay. Now, then you can get to more of a whole food multivitamin. Now, technically, if you're taking the modern traditional, you should probably take the whole food along with it. Nobody really does that because It's too expensive, it's too cumbersome. I get it. And again, when we use the primal multi, they've accounted for that somewhat. Like not as much as I'd like, but they have. They've made an attempt. Um, but with a whole food multivitamin, the one we use is gluten-free Catalin. There is also a plain Catalin. This is obviously you can tell it's from standard process. Catalin it was the original formula that they started with all the way back in the late 1920s. They were starting to deal with processed foods working their way into the marketplace. And they knew from research that was done through Doctors Price and Pottinger, a couple of dentists that traveled around the world. There were several other people doing similar research that processed foods were going to be the end of us. And they weren't wrong. I think it took a little bit longer than they thought. But they predicted that if we transitioned to a largely processed food diet, that we would eventually succumb to infertility, weakness, frailty, cancer, metabolic disabilities like diabetes and stuff, inability to burn off our own body fat. Our brains wouldn't function as well. Our hormone levels would drop, like testosterone's dropping. Like they knew all this was going to happen. And they preached about it and they beat the drum until eventually the pharmaceutical companies kind of forced them to shut up. Like they were doing censorship, and although they didn't call it misinformation, they were going after it as such, even back in the I'd say early to mid 1900s. So anyway, they created Catalin as a way to combat some of the problems with processed foods. They were wanting to include those vital factors that were in living food that was being stripped out of the processed food. So it has things in it like organ extracts, pea vine juice, carrot powder, beet powder, alfalfa powder, nutritional yeast, wheat germ oil, and then I think it's got some oat flour and stuff in it. So they're bringing in properly raised heirloom style foods in their whole living form. Like they're not cooking these. They juice them, they vacuum extract the moisture out of them, they create a powder, and then they formulate it and pack it into this pill. So the Catalin and the GF is gluten free. They do make a non gluten free. I don't know if I said that a minute ago. That is truly a whole food supplement. Um, you can see why it would round out something like this. Like if you were to take a lower dose of the primal multi and then you were to throw in a handful of the Catalin, now you've got the punch, the nutritional density of the modern traditional, but you've got all the little tiny unknown cofactors and living food that's in the whole food multi. So if I'm trying to really refeed somebody who's in a desperate situation, I'm using both, right? They complement each other very well. So anyway, that's the whole food. Now, the third offshoot, this is a kind of a side offshoot of the whole food. And it doesn't involve, you notice I listed several plants in the whole food multi in the Catalin. This one doesn't have any plants. Well, not directly. This is an organ supplement. It's called Organ Synergy. And it's got beef, heart, spleen, pancreas, and liver. Hearts, yes. Organs. Where the plants come in is the cows eat the plants, incorporate those nutrients into their biologic matrix. And then you take the most nutrient dense components of that animal, you desiccate them, dry them out, turn them into a powder, and put them in a capsule. It is a whole food supplement that incorporates plants, but allows the animal to bring those nutrients into a biologic matrix more like ours. And then you take the most nutrient dense components of that and put it into a pill. Now, could you put the organ synergy along with the primal multi to round it out? Absolutely, you could. Could you put organ synergy along with the Catalin? Absolutely, you could, right? Um, I don't know that I would do all three. I think you're going to overload yourself and just have to pee out a whole lot of nutrients. I would probably either do the organ synergy and the Catalin, or I would do maybe the Catalin and the primal, or maybe the organ and the primal. I would not do all three. Um, So that's an overview of multivitamins, at least as they exist in my office. Now, every office is going to have a different multivitamin. I do have a liquid multivitamin that I use from time to time. I have some patients that just mechanically can't swallow a pill, or we've got children that haven't learned to swallow a pill yet. So we do some liquid multivitamins with them. I'm not a big fan of gummies. uh, they definitely fall into the synthetic category. Finding a whole food gummy is pretty difficult just because you can't put the volume you need in there. And then you've got everything it takes to make the gummy. Yes, it can be done with a good quality collagen, um, certain vegetable juices for the color. You can put natural flavors in it, but then it becomes very expensive, and nobody seems to take the time and expense to produce them that way. But I'm sure if you looked around out there, you could probably find something. Some parents even make their own, and I don't have a big issue with that. But anyway, those are kind of special situations. But these are the multivitamins that I recommend here on a regular basis. Now, to get them, if you're a patient of mine, call the office, we'll hook you up. If you're not a patient of mine, you can still call the office and we can hook you up with a multivitamin. Um, or you can go to my website, drkrupka.com, drkrupka. And in the upper right corner, you can click on the link that says store, and you will see a link to get to Designs for Health for these two. And there's a link to get the standard process for the Catalin. So help yourself, get what you need. Dosing on these, like I said on this one, probably one capsule for every 50 pounds of body weight, and spread them out throughout the day. On this one, 6 capsules makes about an ounce of organ meat, and that's divided between 5 organs. So 3 and 3, 2, 2 and 2, something like that on this one for an average size adult. And then for Catalin, I normally recommend 6 to 8 a day. These are small pills; they're about the size of an aspirin. So I normally recommend 6 or 8 a day. What would happen if you took 20 of them? Nothing. I mean, maybe you're wasting some of it, but I think that depends on your situation. I mean, if you're fasting and you want to take, 12 or 16 or 18 a day to give yourself nutrients while you're fasting, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you're eating a good, well-rounded diet, do you need 16 or 18 a day? Probably not. Okay. Could you dose this down for kids? Absolutely, you could, right? If 6 or 8 or 10 a day is an adult dose, 150-pound male, do the math. Give your kid 1 or 2 a day, maybe 3, depending on their size. Crush it up in a little bit of applesauce. Your kid's getting whole food nutrition. I guarantee you they're not eating pea vine juice and carrot powder at home, right? Not willingly. So anyway, those are multivitamins. I've gone on way too long. I'll do a whole series of videos where I go through a video on fish oil, video on probiotics, video on vitamin D and magnesium. I'll go through all that. So wherever you're finding this video, poke around a little bit and you'll find the other ones that round out the foundational 5. If you have any questions, let me know. But like I said, feel free to visit the website. Feel free to call the office. We'll get you hooked up with what you need. Have a great one.